You have the dream job that I always wanted as a sort of a young girl. I always was like, you know, I'd love to work at Vogue, at the magazines. Like the editor of Vogue to me was literally the most epic, big dream fantasy job I could ever imagine. And it's so incredible that you have that job. And I feel like it would have been amazing to see somebody that, una Latina, that sort of was able to sort of get there. So my question to you is, I'd love to know a bit more about sort of your background, and then your journey to get to this amazing, like, incredible position that you have right now.
So I was born in Orlando. No one knows that. My parents moved to the U.S. Shortly after they were married. My father was a doctor and always had this dream to want to work in the U.S. and do his residency. So he applied and was accepted in the 70s, when I know there were a lot of foreigners that applied to be doctors in the US, and there was a program that let them in. So a lot of my childhood friends are still in Florida, and they all lived in this apartment complex, and they were Chilean and Argentinian and Mexican, and it was like this kind of melting pot, right, of young foreign doctors. And then so we lived in Orlando, and then we moved to Memphis, Tennessee. And my sister and I were the only two Mexican girls in the school, right, which was quite funny. And our English accent, we spoke with a Southern twang, which was really funny, because you had these like two very Mexican looking girls that said y'all, and spoke like a very, very Southern English. And then we moved to El Paso, which is where I call home, in Texas. And I knew I loved fashion. I remember I became friends with one of my best friends to this day. So it was for superficial reasons, but we decided that we did like each other. She was wearing this really cool Esprit sweatshirt. And Esprit. I went and asked her what brand her sweatshirt was. And she's like, you're not supposed to ask that, but it's Esprit. And then I said, can we be friends? And we became best friends, and we're still really good friends. So I knew I loved clothing in the way that it made you feel. I grew up looking at magazines, as I'm sure you did too. It was our, like, very much like a generational thing. I would look at Hola and Vogue and Bazaar, and I kind of got my fashion education through these magazines. And after I graduated from high school, I went to school in Arizona, at University of Arizona in Tucson. And I remember one summer, a good friend of mine, Loretta, whose mother worked at a retail store in El Paso, was like, "Oh, my mom got me an internship at Nicole Miller." And I was like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do this summer?" Like, totally terrified.
What did you study at uni?
I studied marketing because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I think, like, I don't know, I graduated in 95. So there wasn't like a fashion. I remember at University of Arizona, there was they started a fashion program, like a fashion merchandising program. I think a lot of my friends majored in that. And I remember not being sure exactly what I wanted to do. And you hear fashion merchandising and you're like, oh, that's so specific. So I decided to study marketing. And that summer, I was like, I cannot intern at my dad's office and like get paper cuts all summer and live in El Paso. So I started cold calling magazines. And I remember I called AFA Showroom, which is owned by Alberta Ferretti and her husband in New York. And some nice person picked up the phone and was like, "Yeah, of course we have interns. Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from El Paso, but I live in Tucson." And she's like, "I'm from Tucson." So I was lucky enough to get someone on the phone, and I went to interview, and I flew up to New York. I mean, in 1998, like, flying to New York just on a whim was not what it is now, right? It's, you're like 19 years old, and my mom was like, "You're going where? Who are you going to stay with?" And I stayed with a family friend's daughter, not even a family friend. I mean, can you imagine? And I interned at AFA that summer, and it was amazing. I loved New York. And I realized being there that there was so much, that the fashion industry was really, really big. And that you could be an editor, you could be a market editor, you could be a buyer, you could be in PR, and you don't really see that until you work, right? Like, until you get this experience. So I always think that experience is so important, and just getting to know the industry that you want to work in, and that way you can define, because there's so many layers, right, to any industry.
Yeah. It's almost like when you're a doctor and you decide what to specialize in or something like that. It's kind of a similar thing. Like when you, I had a similar experience where I went into working in a publishing house, at Condé Nast too, but I literally had zero idea when I first began the difference between each department and what each department did. I didn't even know what a fashion editor was,
Yeah.
what your job was. I feel like now, because of social media, or maybe it's not, but I feel like more, people understand at least what a stylist is and what
Yes.
an editor is.
Whereas before we didn't. So, I mean, unless you were kind of a die-hard magazine person, like, you had no idea what like a Tawny Goodman did or an Edward Enninful. And at that summer in New York, I remember a girl walking in, and she was an editor at W, and they were like, "Can you help her? She's here to pull a few things." And I was like, oh, it was like my eyes lit up, with stars. And so I knew I wanted to intern in magazines the following summer. So I called W, same way I called AFA. And they gave me an internship. And the woman that actually gave me the internship, I always say her name. Her name's Stella Angelakos. She ended up going to Condé Nast when they bought W, and she ended up giving me my first job at Mademoiselle, or interviewing me, looking, saying like, "What are you up to?" And we're still in touch. And I'm sure you say this to young girls and kids all the time, is get experience and be nice to everyone and form friendships with people, because, obviously you never know where you're going to meet, someone that interviewed you, 5 years ago could be someone that interviews you, down the line for the biggest job of your life. So, so after I graduated from college, I moved to Paris for a year, interned there as well. And I don't know, my dad would let me do crazy things. And then finally at the end of the year in Paris, he's like, all right, you need to get a job. You're not going to get a French visa. It hasn't happened in a year. So, move anywhere, but you gotta like have an income. And so I moved to New York. And I emailed Stella when I moved back, and she said, there's a position at Mademoiselle. And I started there. It was do you remember the year, 2000, when there was the big kind of internet boom and the first kind of batch of magazines started closing. And, it was that very strange year, right? That a lot of internet companies, it was kind of the first internet bust, I should say, not boom. And I started working at Mademoiselle. And then a friend of mine, one of my good friends in the industry, Gareen Zarunian, who now works at Armani, said to me, they're looking for someone at Elle. Maybe you should interview. And I went to interview and I got the job. And so I worked at Elle for a few months. Like, I think it was.
What position was this? Like a fashion assistant?
Yeah, fashion assistant. Fashion assistant at Mademoiselle before they closed it. Then I went to Elle and it was fashion assistant there during like when 9/11 happened and that kind of crazy time in the world. And I remember my dad was like, you are not leaving New York for any reason. New York's going to come back and you're a little scared right now, but you'll see that it's a wonderful place to be, and, it'll get back on its feet. And he was really right. And so after that, I was working at Elle for 4 months, I think. And my friend Gareen emailed me again. It's like, they're looking for someone at Vogue. It's not an easy job to get because everyone, has to meet Anna, and who knows if you'll get the job, but go and interview. And I went to interview, and it was amazing because I remember meeting Grace Coddington and meeting Anna for the first time. And I remember I went to go buy a sweater at Bergdorf Goodman because there was no Rent the Runway. There was no Zara. There was no, it was like either you coughed up like $500 to buy something nice or you borrowed something from a friend. And I bought a sweater from Olivier Teskins and I borrowed a coat from a friend.
That's hilarious.
And I interviewed at Vogue and I got the job. They called me a few days later, and obviously I was ecstatic. I was also a fashion assistant there, and I worked there for almost 5 years. I became a fashion associate. I worked for one of the stylists. That was really interesting because, it's such, a lot of those positions have gone freelance now, but the editor that I worked for, I learned a different side, which is the side of production, which, is super important and something that no one talks about, right? Half the job is producing the shoe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I feel like that's a very underrated or under talked about position, fashion production. I always think, like sometimes, assistants when they come in, especially if people are really organized in terms of sort of putting pieces together. I would always say to people like fashion production, that's an amazing skill and a really creative part of, of putting shoots together.
Yeah.
Really under talked about job option.
And it's a really great one because I think you can segue it into production for shows and, and event production. I feel like everything, it's a really great intro into how to produce anything, you know, once you've been given a certain amount of money and you have to work on it. So that was a really great experience. But then a friend of mine, I think it was Doreen, also recommended me to work at the New York Times at for Stefano Tonki at T. And, you know, I worked at Vogue, so I was like, I don't, you know, why am I going to leave Vogue? And I remember Phyllis Posnick, one of the editors, said to me, you know, you only leave Vogue once. You know, or, you know, a few people leave it a few times, but you only leave Vogue once, make sure you're going to the right job. And I really took that to heart. And it was an amazing job as market director at the New York Times style mag at T. And it was amazing because it was my first, I call it my first real adult job because I was a director. I could afford a studio apartment. You know, it kind of changed a lot of things for me. And I was quite young. I think I was 26, 27. So I was one of the younger directors, which is always hard. As you know, in the fashion industry, people like to make you sweat for those titles, you know, like really, really work for those and remind you that you're, you know, the youngest director and kind of earn the respect. And I worked there for 5 years with Stefano. I went to interview shortly after that for a few months to work for Carl Templer and Fabian Baron, which was amazing. And then when Stefano went to the New York Times, after Stefano left the New York Times and went to W, I went with him. So that was, I think I spent 5 years there. I mean, now that I think about it, it seems like so long ago, but
W.
Yeah, I was at W for 5 years. And then during that time, I got married, and I married a Mexican man that grew up in Mexico City. We always say that we have kind of reverse roles because his mom's American but moved to the U.S. and my parents are Mexican and moved to the U.S. Sorry, his mom was American, moved to Mexico.
Oh.
And so he said to me, you know, do you want to move to Mexico? And I said, well, you know, we thought about it and we made a decision as partners. And it was a great decision. I was scared because I obviously wasn't sure what the job situation was. And I had to freelance for the first time and learn to work not in an office, which to me, you know, having spent basically 15 years in an office in New York City, taking the subway, moving to another country and having to, you know, work for myself was really interesting and challenging. And then I got the call to work at Vogue. And I remember, I think it was Lázaro Hernandez from Proenza Schooler was like, you know, Karla, she's going to move to Mexico and become the editor-in-chief of Vogue Mexico. And yes, obviously that was my dream. But the girl that had been here, the editor that had been here, I really didn't see her leaving. And what I didn't know was that she ended up moving to Colombia and to get married. And so she took on a different role. So it was kind of perfect timing. And
wild.
Yeah.
I always thought that you had moved back to Mexico for that, or you had moved to Mexico for that job.
No. It was.
I had always thought.
I always say that it's really interesting and funny how life works because we moved for my husband's job. And I remember I signed my contract like the first week in January of 2016. And in literally 2 weeks later, he came home and he was like, Karla, they're closing the bank where I moved here for.
Oh.
And I said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, listen, he's like, you've just taken a job and you've signed a contract. And I know it's the job of your dreams. So, you know, while normally I would be looking for a job in New York, I think, you know, I owe it to you to look for a job here and find something, you know, at least the first couple of years, you know, just to give you a chance to, you know, take this position, which was amazing. And obviously it's about what partners do for each other. So I always think that's important. So now he started his own business. It kind of pushed him to do something on his own with a few partners. So yeah.
How many years is it now in Mexico?
So we've been here for 5 years because my daughters are going to be 5 next month, and I was pregnant when I moved. And so I'll be at Vogue Mexico for 5 years in May, which is wild.
That is wild. That is incredible. I mean, that's such an incredible story. And it really just shows what it takes. Because that's a lot of stepping stones, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of years of work. I think that sometimes the misconception, or I think that people are sometimes disheartened if they're not kind of like, they come in on the first day. Sometimes I get interns that are going to come in on the first day and expect to be kind of styling the cover of some, Vanity Fair. And you're like, no, that's about 15 years away, It's the fashion industry is just one of those industries where you really do have to, I mean, it's not one of those ones that happens overnight. I mean, maybe it does for some people, but it certainly wasn't. It wasn't the case. It took me a lot of years of stepping from one place to another, small steps to sort of, until you finally get to a point where, like you said, you could afford your first studio apartment when you got to the New York Times. It takes many years of sort of lucha,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Struggle, low paid jobs. You're like, can I make rent this month?
I know. I remember, I always say this like awful story that I had 3 roommates, and it was, I think like I always call it my blue period. It was like it was 2004. My dad had died in 2000. There was one of those like really bad years. And I came home in July and I had an eviction notice, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And our roommate had said she was paying the rent, and we were giving her, cashier's checks, and, and so I kind of, as you said, struggling to pay the rent. Also living in a city like New York, which what it's like. People want to go out, and you're kind of embarrassed or to say like, I don't have any money, I can't go out tonight, which is what I should have said, but we all have this kind of talk about, the FOMO factor when you're, 23 and living in Manhattan, and everyone is like, you have like the girl with the trust fund that's going out, or the girl, your bank friend that's a banker that makes, 5 times as much as you. So it was about that balance too. But I do have to say, one of the things that my father taught me, just being, an immigrant in the U.S., especially, it was like he always said to me, you're going to have to work, twice as hard, because people want to, people have, certain misconceptions about Latinos, about Mexicans, about Colombians, that they're, certain stereotypes, and unfortunately, you're going to have to work on proving yourself. And he was right. I think a lot of thanks to my dad kind of always saying that, and always saying, you're not going to like everyone you work with. They are not your friends, and you have to always have the mindset that you're not there to make friends. You're there to work, and to work hard. And if you want to move up, you have to learn how to deal with certain situations that aren't always easy. And I think that is the perfect description, as you know, of the fashion industry. I think another industry that it's similar, that you kind of work in both simultaneously, is entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel the same thing. I've always felt that, being a Latinas, or being different, especially in an industry like the fashion industry, where it's changing now and it's getting much better. But I think certainly, when you and I were probably starting out, everybody kind of looked the same.
Right.
There's very little diversity at the time. And, some of those you know, it was kind of like, it was a lot more snobby back then than
Right.
now. It's getting a lot more sort of inclusive, but I feel like when I first started, not being inclusive was cool. You know, it was literally like, you can't sit with us kind of mentality.
Was very much that. I mean, if you think about like front rows and what they look like and how they've changed, I feel like a lot of the times, and I was talking to a group of Latinas at Condé Nast on Friday, is that a lot of the times we were just kind of trying to blend in, not stand out too much, not, you know, shake the water, or however that saying go, you know, just kind of just be blending in. And I feel like a lot of the times as Latinas, we just try and blend in, and we don't say, okay, there aren't enough of us in the room. There aren't enough of us on covers. There's not enough of us on in you know, our favorite TV shows. So I think that that's one thing that that we have to be more vocal about, because no one's going to do it for us.
I certainly wish that as my younger self had sort of embraced my Latina-ness and my culture a little bit more. I think there was a part of me that kind of suppressed my Colombian-ness when I was working in London and sort of living that sort of London life and trying so hard to be, you know, like the girls like in Sex and the City that I used to see, that I were like literally like the Carrie Bradshaw, like that's all I wanted to be.
Yeah.
An element that where, you know, that sort of the culture, like my Latin culture kind of got a little bit diluted. And I'm so happy that, you know, we have a moment now where, you know, like I certainly feel a lot more reconnected with Colombia. My parents are back there now and not in London anymore. And I visit a lot more than I went through a few years where I didn't go to Colombia for like 6 years. So, and I think that if there's anything that I would pass on, it's sort of like an embrace, like it's time to embrace the different, like that we are different, and that our culture is colorful, and all of these aspects of being a Latina,
right,
are things that we should be proud of, because it's an incredible, beautiful, diverse, happy ambiente.
Yes, it's true. It's so true. But it's as you're saying, you know, we were just, I think, and who could blame us in a way, you know, because I mean, if you think about, like, we were working, we were watching Sex and the City, and, you know, there was not one Latina to be found in there. I mean, everyone, you know, looked the same. And now, I mean, thanks to a lot of the streaming services, now you have a more diverse representation of what it's like. But still, there's not a show that's like the Latina moving to New York. You know, it's like Betty La Fea. You know what I mean? Whereas, like,
exactly.
You know, so I 100% agree with you. I wish that sometimes that was like one of the amazing things about working for Edward, was that he was like, no, you know, there are no other Black men in the front row, and I need to speak up about it, you know, and now, you know, it happens to me also that, you know, I go to the shows and sometimes they're like, oh, well, we only have a second row or a third row seat for your territory. And I'm like, well, my territory is a continent. It's, yes, you know, Latin America and Mexico. And in case you didn't notice, you know, we're the second largest minority in the US.
Right.
And just people from Latin America are all over the world. We travel, we spend money in all different countries. So to kind of corner you into a certain category is wrong. And I think not current, right?
I feel like what's incredible though is that like there are, you know, certainly when I was younger, there was not even, I don't think there was even one Latina that I can think of that sprung to mind in the fashion industry that I was aware of at the time. And I think it's like really, these days, what's amazing is that there aren't enough. There should be more.
Right.
There will be more. But what's amazing about someone like you in your position is that you're able to, you know, you then pass down those opportunities. So like those opportunities, you're able to now, all of these people that you've talked about that gave you the opportunity, that gave you the job interview, that told you about the job, you're now that person for other people, you know. And I think that you've done an amazing job, even, you know, even with me, you've helped me. You put Yalitza on the cover of Vogue Mexico and Latin America before anybody was really paying attention. And she was on the cover, which was incredible, before any nominations had come out or anything. And that directly helped me with my job, because I was then able to say, you know, look at this girl, she's on the cover of Vogue. And I'd go to the designers and I'd show them, you know, here's a Vogue that's endorsing my client, you know, play ball, let's get the ball rolling, let's get some clothes, you know. And that not only, you know, really had a large impact on Yalitza's success, I believe, but it made the fashion industry pay attention and take us, what we were trying to do on the red carpet, seriously. And that was a choice that you made as a Latina for another Latina. And I feel like, and then now Yalitza's a big star. So,
right.
You know, the more Latinas that we have out there in those positions where you can make decisions like that, you know, that then multiplies other Latinas that in 5 years are going to be able to make another bunch of like amazing choices for Latinas. And I feel like that is, you know, something really optimistic that, you know, I hope that everybody here that's watching this, that has ambition to be in the fashion industry, you know, the more Latinas we have working, the more Latinas we have working, I believe, because Latinas help Latinas. So yeah, I feel like that's something, an example, which is so clear of, you know, a choice that you made that had such a large impact on, you know, on other people.
Right. Which at the time, I guess we didn't even realize the impact that it would have. And the fact that I think a lot of the brands also, you have to convince them, no, you know, she had not been nominated yet. So I'm sure that you, in your job, is, I mean, even with us, when we shoot young Latina actresses that people don't know who they are, you know, you have a lot of this, oh, I don't know who she is, we can't loan clothes to her. And it's, you know, I think the brands have to start doing their research better and their homework more, because, you know, obviously there's so many talented young girls coming into, you know, the entertainment world. And as we were saying, you know, now there's more shows that people are watching. You know, just today I saw that Manolo Caro show, which is Someone Has to Die, is like, you know, number 5 on Netflix in the world, you know, below Emily in Paris, you know. So it's, as you said, it's so important to support each other. You know, I think that that's one of the things that we have been committed to at the magazine is, you know, a lot of the times people ask us if we shoot American actresses. Well, yeah, we do, but there's also, I think it's a great space for Latina actresses that are up and coming. Our November cover is amazing. I'm sure you will love it. You know, it's an homage to a fellow Latina that died a few years ago. This person is playing her. So I think it's going to be really exciting. And, you know, I obviously feels, you know, like my work is, it gives really different meaning a new meaning to my work when you say to the magazine's work, when you say that, you know, how important it is and how important it was for the Yalitza cover and how it inspired different Latinas around the world, you know, not just in the US, but everywhere.
Yeah. The other thing I think is really incredible is that actually talking to you now and hearing about how, you know, how you grew up and all of these things, it's not as though you or I had, you know, my parents immigrated, my parents immigrated to London. We lived in London, but my parents didn't really speak English, and I didn't even speak English when I went to school. So we were like, we were the immigrant, Latinos in the, in the school, in the community. There were not many Latinos in the UK at that time. Now there are more, but back then we stood out. And, we didn't grow up with, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. I didn't grow up with like an amazing, I went to, what you would we call it state school. I don't know what you call it. Like
Public.
I went to regular school, community school. And like my point is that you don't have to have an extraordinary life in order to accomplish these things. Like you could do this. So if I can do it, and you could do it,
yeah,
then you can do, like, it's possible. It takes hard work and resilience, and sometimes you want to give up. Sometimes you're broke. Sometimes you're afraid. Sometimes you're exhausted. But I feel like if there's one thing that we know about Latinos is that they're hard workers and they are strong, so it's like, if you and I can do this, then everybody watching this now can also accomplish these things.
Yes.
It just takes, it takes time and really hard work and commitment. But I would certainly say that, or encourage, what you do have to do is to have the courage to try.
Right, exactly. You can't, and I always say, I think, as I said, my father was a doctor, so I did grow up with that, certain amount of privilege, as we all do, that we could go to school and go to college. But once you were, I don't know, once I was in that job in New York, that didn't get, it was all the hard work. And I have to say, like, once you move to New York, you realize that, well, yes, you grew up with a certain amount of privilege in El Paso, but it's not, New York. When you compare yourself,
magazine world, that's a whole different ball game of
exactly
privilege once you get.
But regardless of who you were, especially like in the case of when I worked at Vogue US, it was the hardest work. Everyone had to work hard, no matter if you were a family friend of someone's and made your way in, or you were just like me, that they kind of took a chance on this girl from El Paso that had worked at, had prior magazine experience and came recommended by, someone in fashion. I think we knew how important it was to be there, and that if we didn't work hard, we weren't going to survive.
I mean, you can be given, I feel like there are always moments where you have like a little bit of really good luck. So your good luck, you had an amazing stroke of luck when, somebody left their job and you got their job. I had a very similar stroke of luck when I was an intern. I had been working, I had work experience in an internship at British GQ magazine. And I had been the intern, it was my first sort of work experience in internship, where I'd actually been able to stay there for a significant amount of time. So I'd been there for 8 months, and I was overjoyed with this job. I thought that, I couldn't believe my luck. I was living my dream. I was working at a magazine. I was at Vogue House. I would work at Condé Nast. All these glamorous people were around. I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And I was the keenest intern you will ever meet. I would go in on the weekends to do the fashion returns, so that when the editors came in on Monday, the office would be clear and nobody even ever noticed that I was doing that. The editors didn't know, but I knew, and I knew that like I would go in on the weekends and tidy things up and do whatever. And I was so devastated when my internship was coming to an end, because they said, we can't legally, we can't have you here anymore. You have to go.
We had those too.
Yeah. And I was like, oh God, but please, can I not stay? I just like love being here. They were like, no, you literally can't. You have to go. And just as my internship was about to end, the then fashion assistant at GQ, she then got a job at Vogue, so she left, which was the best timing, ever. But what did happen was they just gave me her job. They didn't interview anyone else. They just said, hey, I guess you're in now. And it was like a combination of two things. It was like a stroke of absolute luck from the universe or the powers that be above that, thank you, were looking out for me. But also it was the fact that I had been such an eager intern, so crazy, like the crazy super intern, that they didn't, the fact that they didn't even advertise the job was to do with the fact that I had worked hard. So it's almost like you need both. So you need to be, you want to be the most sort of hardworking person so that you're memorable,
Exactly.
And then you also, you're going to have those nuggets that sometimes is luck. But you can have luck, but if you don't deliver on it, then it's wasted.
Yeah, wasted. It's wasted opportunity. So
exactly.
I think you're so right about that. It's kind of at the right place at the right time, but you have to be ready to go at the right, in those situations.
And now as the coin flips, and I'm now the person looking at the interns, and the assistants and whatnot. And as the person that's gonna like maybe look to see like who's an intern, who could then become an assistant, and promotions like that, then you understand it's like there are certain people that stand out because of their work ethic and whatnot, not only talent, but also I feel like sometimes you have to be willing to do a little bit more than other people, and
right.
You stand out, and then they're the ones that I look for, and I'll notice that sort of drive in somebody, and they're the ones that then I will they're the sort of shining stars that then you pick up and develop and promote and whatnot.
Yeah, the ones that kind of stay maybe that extra hour, or not in an exploiting way, in that way that it's like, because now you can't send interns for coffee, you can't send interns, there's now so many rules, right? Which I completely agree with. No one wants to abuse anyone, but I do think that those internships are where you can see amazing people that can work for you.
So it's also about about how much they want it, because for example, when I was an intern, I never felt like I was working too much. I loved being there. I loved playing with the clothes, unpacking the clothes, looking at the shoes, like feeling all the fabrics, like, wow, this is so expensive. Like I'd never held these things before. It was an enjoyment for me because it was my passion, and every single experience, which may have seemed monotonous to some, to me was exciting. It was never. I always felt like I was I just never felt like I was working. I always felt like I was just.
I felt the same.
Yeah.
I felt like I remember taking couture dresses between London and Paris with another one of the interns. And I remember being so excited by being in like David Sim's studio and touching, going into the haute couture salon at Chanel to pick up a garment bag or box.
And by the way, I still get excited when I receive a couture gown. Still to this day, I'm like, oh, like I love seeing it in the studio, and to have them, to be able to hold them and touch them. I mean, I don't know if that I still get excited, during award seasons when we get all these incredible dresses and you can look at them and feel them close up. It's just, I don't know if for me that kind of, now, not as excited as I did the first time I saw it, but it's like, wow, to be able to have something in your hands that you've seen on a runway is amazing.
Yeah, and in the end, I think it goes back to doing what you love, right? And being it's in that way of how clothes makes you feel, how when you put it on a celebrity and you see them, especially for you walking down that red carpet with something that's so special and that took so much time to make, and you appreciate the craft, I feel like completely changes things and makes you love your job even more, right? Because it's so rewarding.
Absolutely. And it's still hard work, there's still days when you like, there's some days when I hate my job, I feel like I still, it certainly isn't, and it still is hard, even when you've managed to make it work. It's still, you still have those hard days, but everything, I've always felt like every bit of hard work that you do has been worth it, because eventually I got the outcome that I wanted, but like even better than I had imagined. The fact that I made it to Los Angeles, I'd always kind of like been curious about LA and like, wow, sort of LA, like Hollywood. And then, cut to here I am, and it sort of evolved. It was a journey that evolved naturally. I didn't push too much. I just kept working every day. And then at some point you end up where you need to be, or where you're meant to be. Right. That's one of those things.
So true. It's so true. I feel like it kind of works its way out, I think, I don't know. I never dreamed of living in Mexico, but now I feels like it was kind of always where I was meant to be. I don't know if forever, but I love the duality, right? Of especially being able to have two cultures, I think is amazing.
Do you feel that you've since you've been living in Mexico, and now that you're like the editor of this magazine that covers so many, so many different countries, and Latin America is so broad and every culture has its differences and whatnot, do you feel that you have reconnected again to your Latina-ness, and that you sort of, do you feel more Latina than you did before?
I think in a weird way, New York was one of those places that was very embracing of it. I think it was very it was celebrated, and there were other New York is very much a melting pot. So I think it started happening a few years ago, and now I'm just happy kind of being from both countries in a way.
Yeah. And that's another funny thing to sort of, I feel like, especially actually in the United States, I don't think that people are used to hearing a Latina with a British accent. Sometimes I feel like I have to explain, they're looking at me kind of weird. I'm like, yeah, I'm sort of because there's a part of me which is very British. I grew up there. I have so many British friends. I love the British culture and I love London. And then you have this other side, which is still very much, I look very Latina. My whole family is very Colombian, like my sister married a Colombian guy. Like I am the most British out of my whole family. Everybody's still in Colombia and very Colombian. So it's like one of those things which is it's nice to have that duality, that duality of, and it kind of comes out in your work as well. My work is sort of has a European aesthetic. But then it's really colorful. And I feel like that's just my Latin culture that just like can't help itself. Just comes out, I just like love color and I'm completely attracted to it. And that's, I feel like that is definitely like something tropical that is inherently
part of you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. I really hope that this conversation is inspiring to people, that they know that their dreams are within their reach, with hard work and perseverance and really believing in yourself and embracing who you are. I think that's one of the most important things that we've talked about is embracing where we come from, and it makes you more special. And really, I think it's one of the most important things that really helped me in my career is this duality. And even when I moved here, seeing things with the eyes of maybe my American side, and in New York, looking at things on with Mexican eyes, I think that's what makes it so special. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I think we're living in a really, really, really important time. And more than anything, we just have to believe in ourselves and who we are as Latinas, and speak up.